In just a few decades, China has transformed from a largely agrarian society into a global economic powerhouse. From the late 20th century, reforms opened the door to market-driven growth. Massive infrastructure projects, like high-speed railways and modern cities, showcase this shift. By embracing technology and innovation, China became a manufacturing giant and a leader in e-commerce and tech industries. With a population of over 1.4 billion, China's rapid development has reshaped global trade, turning the country into the second-largest economy in the world. Yet, challenges remain as it continues to evolve and innovate in the 21st century. The debate over China's future path remains a complex balance between progress and tradition. Some argue political reform could bring greater freedoms and transparency, while others believe the current system ensures stability and growth. The following clip features Eric Li and Minxin Pei debating the future of China's governing system.
And so, Eric, instead of having you answer that directly, let me ask you a different question. One is to clarify your argument. Are you saying the current Chinese system essentially is the optimum Chinese system for the long run, or are you saying this is a transitional period to some more democratic system later on, but that's in the foreseeable future? Second, if you would sort of spell out how you imagine the next 10 or 15 years of Chinese development going.
Well, I am saying the former, which is the current system is somewhat optimal. It doesn't mean it won't change. I think it will change a great deal as it has in the last 63 years. One quick note about the point about dictatorships and autocracies, about cheating to stay in power. I've been here for a few days. I've been watching American television because there's an election going on in this country. Talking about cheating to gain power or keep power, it's hard to outdo the Americans. I've been watching these commercials. My friends, you guys got to be careful. Cheating to maintain power. But let's come back to your. I think going forward, the system will need to adapt and change. But I am fairly confident, again, based on track record. Think about the last 63 years, right? From 1949, the country through those 63 years, from every phase to the next, at the establishment of the People's Republic in 1949, to the 50s, to the 60s, through the Cultural Revolution, the country is irrecognizable from one phase to the next. And if you've been to China for the last 30 years, you'll know the country is irrecognizable. The leaders are irrecognizable. Their political outlooks, the policies they pursue, all under the same one-party system. So the breadth of change the one-party system has been able to embrace and implement is much wider than any multi-party election countries that I see today. Think about it. I mean, you picking Romney and Obama is like between Coke and Pepsi. Compare with the changes that have been happening, the breadth of changes been happening in the one-party state in China.
Well, I would just invite you to look at pictures of China's People's Congress and China's Party Congress. I think soon you're going, when you go back to your room and to on YouTube and type in China's National People's Congress, today they convene every year. And look at the pictures over the last 30 years. I bet you hardly notice any change because the country has changed. The society has changed, the economy has changed, the people have changed. The one thing that has not changed very much is its political system.
That's right.
And that worries people like me to no end because it shows that I'm not a Marxist, but there has to be some kind of compatibility between the kind of political system and the kind of economy and society. When the gap is too big, then either the political system change or you slow down socio-economic change. And one aspect that we are seeing in China today is that the political system refuses to change. It wants society to change slower, at a slower pace. And that means internet censorship. That means more restrictions on civil society, more restrictions on press freedom. And so I think at some point, either the political system gives or social progress slows down. You just cannot have your cake and eat it too. I mean, China managed to do some of that in the last 20 years, but not forever.
And just before having a response from Eric, if you could address what you think is the most likely path of, say, the next 10 years.
Again, I always fantasize about how China can become democratic. So let me share with you one of those fantasies. A possible path is the economic performance is the key. If economic performance stays as good as it's in the past, then there's one particular path of transition. But if the economic performance in China for the next 10, 15 years deteriorates rapidly, as a lot of people believe, if China does not make the necessary economic changes, then I think the Communist Party will find itself facing rising social discontent, and the party's elites will split, because some of them believe that the party will have to change, and some of their colleagues will disagree, so there will be a split within the party. And then part of the splinter group will try to tap into social discontent to gain political edge. So you're going to have reformers versus conservatives, that kind of fight, spilling over into the open. And that can start the transition process. No transition to democracy in the world has occurred without the split of the ruling elites. And I think China will not be the exception.
Yes. So on this question of split in elite politics or social tensions, or you were wanting to respond to what Minxin was saying earlier.
Well, I think the party is, I think it's a fallacy to say that China's political system has not changed. If you've gone to China consistently in the past decades, the country is irrecognizable from 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years ago in every walk of life. And just by definition, it would be impossible if significant political reforms have not been occurring. Of course, I think you ought to look at the pictures of the ruling class, of the Politburo, and you will notice enormous differences. A big one, an easy one, is they're younger. Why? Because they instituted term limits. Huge change, huge institutional adaptation. Term limits around the country. This was adopted, 20 years ago and continue to improve. Okay, so that's just one example. If you look at the decision-making process within the bureaucracy, at the provincial level, central government level, city level, it's completely different from 20, 30 years ago. When they promote people, they can, I'm associated with a polling company in China. It's the largest private polling company in China. Do you know who their biggest customer is? They do work for Procter & Gamble, all these companies, but the government. Not the central government, not just the central government, provincial government, city government, down to neighborhood districts. They're conducting polling every month. Are you happy with the street cleaning? How are you happy with college education? What your concerns are? And the officials, when they move up the ranks, it's a big thing when they evaluate officials, when they promote them. Unheard of 20 years ago, or even 10 years ago, but it's happening. So enormous changes are taking place within the political system. That's not being reported because I guess Western reporters are not interested in that. They are much more interested in a dichotomy, democracy, wonderful, dictatorship, terrible. And
So let me ask, I'm going to go to questions from the audience soon. I just want to ask one or two more questions here. This is one for Eric that I'd like to hear your response, then Minxin's answer. Each society has certain indicators which are worrisome for its long-term health. In the United States, it's the polarization of income, the decline of the public sphere. I would think in China, one of the indicators would be the way in which the ruling elites increasingly seem to have their assets, their children, their interests outside China and other parts of the world. What significance do you place on that? So many of their offspring are in the U.S. and Britain and Japan.
I think it's significant. It's a big issue that needs to address. It affects the legitimacy of the political system, but I think it's being overplayed. The pie is growing so big that I think what's happening in what you're mentioning is a marginal effect, but it's significant. It ought to be addressed. The second is I want to come back to the question of legitimacy. I think it's a fallacy to equate election with legitimacy. In the vast majority of countries, electoral democracies in the world, governments get elected and they fall immediately below 50%, even 40%, down to 30%. Now, what kind of legitimacy is this? I mean, election voting is a legal concept. It's like if you sign a piece of paper that gives your consent to a sub-mortgage loan. Is that legitimate? It's not morally legitimate, but it's legally binding. So there's a difference between legally binding consent and moral legitimacy.
So, Minxin, would you address that point about legitimacy and also these signs of high-level expatriation from China?
Yeah. I think legitimacy is a much more substantive concept than popularity. I think, again, take the example of signing a contract. You sign a contract, later you regret, but you do not believe that you were under duress. You sign it willingly, and you are not going to go back and try to undo the sign. You simply wait. In the case of electoral democracies, you wait another 4 years and throw this bad government, you made a mistake, you throw the government out of office through a legal process. But during that period, the government is legitimate. The government is highly unpopular. President Bush, George W. Bush, he was highly unpopular, but nobody thought he was illegitimate, at least the second term. Okay, not the first term. The first term was much more controversial. But then you think about the China, what's the act of conveying popular consent? This is not such a public act. When you go to the polls, that actually it's a very serious act. And then I would say, thinking about who is voting with their children's future, their family wealth. I don't know whether you've been reading the press. A lot of Chinese middle-class people pregnant women are rushing through Chinese borders to Hong Kong to give birth so that their children can be born in Hong Kong and Hong Kong citizens because they trust Hong Kong. They're in China. And then you look at anecdotal reports, the data are very difficult to come by. Senior Chinese officials are voting with their feet. Their children, their family wealth are coming to this country. I've not heard a single case of a senior American official trying to apply for a Chinese passport. But I think there were hundreds and hundreds of cases of Chinese officials and their children trying to apply for American passport. So I think let the facts speak for themselves.
On voting, by that definition, every single government in this country since George Washington to Lyndon Johnson were illegitimate.
Or partially legitimate.
Illegitimate, so few. Come on. Landed property owner male, till when? I mean, so could not be legitimate. So I think the voting and legitimacy is not valid.
So I have a short question for each of you, or that is, I'm soliciting a short answer from each of you, and then we'll go back to the... So, Minxin, the question for you is, what time period, what would be a time span in which you say it is probable that China will become democratic? 20 years from now, 50 years from now?
Got put money down.
Put money down. I would say because it's great we have so many people here. Yeah. I would say that no more than 15 years, but no less than 10 years. So we're talking about 10, 15-year time frame.
So I won't ask you that question. I'll ask you a different question. You've made the case strongly that China's model is the right model for China. Will it be propounded, do you think, as a Chinese ideal for the world, or as a Chinese-specific model?
It's a Chinese-specific model. Yeah. China's model is not exportable. It cannot be emulated by others. It is unique to the cultural traditions, historic circumstances of today's China. It is not universal. It cannot be universalized, but there's only one idea that may be universal, is that what works for each individual country should be something that's different, should be something that's consistent with your own culture, with your own history, with your own circumstances. Don't blindly copy other people's models.
The question remains, is China's government the ideal model for long-term stability and growth? Or is it time for China to embrace democratic reforms? Let us know what you think in the comments below.